Right, we're going to get into this. Robert Pape, he's an expert on geopolitics in the Middle East, and it's always interesting to hear his perspective on what's going on. There's been some updates over the last 24 hours in regards to Iran, so let's get into it.
We are joined once again by Robert Pape. He is, of course, University of Chicago professor of political science. He directs the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, and he's the author of Bombing to Win and writes the Substack, The Escalation Trap. Has been many times on this show recently to discuss recent developments out of Iran. Professor Pape, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we were just talking before we went to air. You helped organize a great event last week at Busboys and Poets here in Washington, D.C. That people can go check out on YouTube. It's on the Busboys YouTube. It's full of really interesting perspectives from folks like Wajahat Ali. I did a panel with Joe Kent and Trita Parsi. So Professor Pape, it seemed like a great success. You addressed the crowd. The crowd was loving it. They were very excited to see you in person. So that kind of bridging of the left and the right was an interesting experiment on foreign policy.
It was important in a lot of ways. So first of all, actually going from online to in person, very, very important to do. And also to see the amazing reception. We had hundreds of people who were trying to get into those seats, and it was just incredible to see that. And what that really shows is that there is a crying hunger for a better foreign policy. And that is true across the political spectrum. And that's something that's very, very important as we go forward. So there will, of course, be lots of things we're going to disagree on. This isn't about trying to get people to vote for the same candidate. That said, what we need to do is understand that there is a common understanding that our foreign policy here has simply been a disaster. And we were very unhappy before the Iran war. We're much more concerned now because it's touching our lives in a personal way. So this is now not just simply a principal issue or something to be 5 or 6 issues down the totem pole. This is a front and center issue that's going to affect people's jobs, people's livelihood, what they can eat, what they cannot eat. This is really a dramatic, and it's happening because of a foreign policy decision. And that's what we really want to lean into going forward. And I hope that we'll have more events there. I'm going to have an event here in the city of Chicago, and I'm going to try to do a number of these in-person events where we bring people from across the political spectrum to talk about this need, because as we comment on all the details, and I'm sure we'll do that now, the fact of the matter is there's something bigger going on here. And that bigger we need to move into and not just assume this will all somehow magically take care of itself once we just have a new round of elections. It's only been a few years since we got out of the last forever wars, and we're right back on in another one. This is showing you we need more, and that big guardrail is actually us, the people.
And remember, obviously I'm not American, but Trump ran on the fact, no more wars. Tulsi Gabbard, who recently resigned, is the director of national intelligence. She was printing T-shirts and mugs saying no to the Iran war in the lead up of Trump. Apparently she only pursued that position because I think she was in Congress before, because Trump had promised no more wars in the Middle East. But someone got to them, didn't they?
Well, let's start with this post from Monday that you made, and we can put this up on the screen. You said Trump just made a major concession on the nuclear issue, words that move closer to Iran's position. Good for a deal. You were referring to this post on Truth Social where Trump said the enriched uranium nuclear dust will either be immediately turned over to the United States to be brought home and destroyed, or preferably in conjunction and coordination with the Islamic Republic of Iran, destroyed in place or at another acceptable location, with the Atomic Energy Commission or its equivalent being witness to this process event. And you said, but the U.S. military just attacked missile sites in Iran, daring the IRGC to respond. Bad for a deal. With this chaos, why should Iran believe Trump's promises? And obviously, we are still potentially waiting on a response from the IRGC. So as things stand right now, Professor Pape, help us to understand why, I mean, if you're Iran and you're looking at this, you're looking at Trump conceding on the nuclear issue, then attacking missile sites in Iran. To them, do you think this all just seems totally fake and like posturing?
I think that it seems totally chaotic if you're looking at this from Iran's perspective. And what you see if you're in Iran's shoes is that President Trump is trying to essentially communicate with all these different audiences, including Iran, here, and doing it on Truth Social, and then, of course, with bombing, which is also communication. And these are not adding up in a way that is producing anything like stability here. So we need to understand that this is a situation where Iran is in the driver's seat. So this is chaos by Trump in a situation where it's the United States that has suffered a major strategic defeat in this war. And that is something that not just Iran believes, but other leaders believe. You see that President Trump himself is making concessions to Iran's position. So President Trump may not say it, but he understands that he's got to move to Iran's position. But at the same time, he is seeing that if he owns the L, Crystal, and you heard this on Friday night, that the big problem with the escalation trap is that as President Trump gets closer to owning the loss, then that puts enormous political pressure on him because it causes him to lose the current support he has, or at least whittle it down further. So if you say he's got a solid lock on 33% of the country, and you see that in the primaries, that can actually be whittled down because that 30 to 33% believes he's a winner. And if he goes to being a loser, then that is going to be a further drift down. And I think that's what you're seeing with President Trump. He knows he's in a losing position here. And as he tries to navigate the escalation trap to wiggle out of it, it keeps pulling him back in. And the truth is, he needs to, I think, focus on a narrower set of issues. So what I would maybe talk about this, but I think that this idea that he's just going to fluddle around on all these different issues and find some way to get a W that he can claim here is just getting him deeper into the escalation trap. And look, if it was only his presidency, we could say, who cares? But the problem is, it's not just his presidency. This is impacting negatively all of us listening to this. And by July 15th, those inventories are running out, folks. So we're going to hit a triple time bomb here where inventories are going to run out, and this is just going to hurt even more in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and just so people understand the kind of concession that Trump was floating here, I'll just read it again. He says, you either turn over the quote-unquote nuclear dust to be brought home and destroyed, or preferably in conjunction and coordination with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which I notice he switches around the language that he uses when referring to Iran, depending on kind of his posture toward a deal at the moment. He says the nuclear dust would, quote, be destroyed in place or at another acceptable location, which is another word for, downblending it.
Which is exactly what Iran's position was on February 27. So just what I mean by him moving to Iran is this was exactly the position that President Trump rejected on February 27 in that Oval Office discussion, where he then chose to do the bombing the next day. And so what he's done in that post is he has given up the positions that he's had before, and he's effectively moved to Iran's position. And that would mean, to be clear, what Iran was saying is it would dilute what it had above 3.5%, so all of it would be 3.5% enriched, which also, to be clear, would gain a few extra months in how quickly that material could be produced into a working nuclear weapon. So it doesn't solve the nuclear weapon issue. It is a way, this is why Iran wants that enriched uranium capability and keep 3.5%, because that would allow it within about a year or so to then fashion somewhere between 10, 15 nuclear weapons with the current amount of material here. And that would mean it would rise to become the fourth center of world power as the oil hegemon in the Persian Gulf. So Trump was moving to that position. I've called that stage 4, the escalation trap. And then the problem is, of course, as soon as he announced it here, then he's being attacked here politically. And these are people who are his supporters. So they are telling him, if you own the L, which is what he was saying he was going to do, then you're going to lose that next level of support. And maybe no surprise, we see bombing then a few hours, not too long after that. This is what I've been defining as literally the escalation trap, where it's not that there aren't, words or deals you could talk about, but the politics of the trap is what pulls people to the trap. And that's what you saw right here. President Trump is having a hard time owning the L here, and that's what's keeping him in the trap. And I'm sorry to say, this could bounce back and forth, folks. If we keep to these set of terms, this can go back and forth for months, even when we hit the wall in the middle of July, when we run out of inventories and those gas prices shoot up even higher here, we can bounce back and forth. That's why I'm suggesting we sort of narrow the ambitions here to try to find a way to squeak out of at least a piece of the trap.
Well, right now, as we're awaiting the IRGC's potential response to what the United States is calling these defensive strikes in the Strait of Hormuz, I wanted to get your take on, Professor Pape, your take on what we could expect to see from the IRGC on a kind of technical level, what response is possible, just as we also then try to expect what we see in response to that response from the United States. Now, President Trump has said the Navy has been destroyed. Ryan pointed out earlier in our show that it doesn't make a ton of sense to say their Navy has been destroyed while at the same time say that they're laying landmines in the Strait of Hormuz. But they've said basically missile capacity has been severely damaged. We'll see. Professor Pape, what do you expect to come out of maybe the next 24 to 48 hours, if anything?
Well, I think that, first of all, we need to see that there is a small possibility that Iran may decide to not give up a chance to react at all, but to do it in a more modest way. I don't think that's likely, but I don't think it's really quite off the table here, because after all, Iran was moving Trump toward their position. So I think Iran probably saw that tweet where Trump is giving up the resistance to their February 27 position. And they're saying, actually, President Trump is trying to surrender on their terms. So I think that this is something to not dismiss. That said, I think that what Iran has established since February 28 is that there would be some kind of a quid pro quo. And often, though, it's not directly a quid pro quo the way we might understand it. So remember, the attack against the UAE oil facility was a way that Iran thought about. And it wasn't a direct attack. It was sort of a near miss. It was kind of a brushback pitch to remind everybody that it could do more to damage the supply of oil to the world. And I think that's really what I'm more expecting here, because that's their leverage. Their leverage is very specifically now about the supply of oil to the world. And so I think that this would be completely within their strategic mindset right now. And so that's the most likely attack that I would see.
And so earlier in the conflict, you had said that the escalation trap was going to kind of inexorably push the U.S. towards ground troops in Iran. Other than that weird kind of weekend rescue of the two downed pilots, of which we've heard nothing since and haven't learned who the pilots were, there haven't been American boots on the ground. Right. Why do you think that was? And do you still think the escalation trap pulls in that direction?
So long as the nuclear issue remains front and center here, I think that the issue of U.S. ground forces to go in to get that enriched uranium remains there. The exact timing of that. So I know the public wants escalation to be linear, that it wants it to be on a schedule here, but we need to recall that when I did the modeling, I started not with the modeling where we did a February 28 attack to change the regime. The modeling I've been doing for 20 years starts with the U.S. bombing Fordow and the nuclear facilities, and then saying about a year or two after that, we would do regime change bombing, which in fact happened. And then a period of time after that would be the limited ground operations here to get the nuclear material, that dust that he calls, it's not really dust, but, and I think that that's really still there. And you hear pressure from Netanyahu for that as well. So I realize the public wants things to be like a light switch. Either it's all, escalation is all on, or it's not. But what you're really seeing is the way real war works. Real war are these long periods of boredom where costs are mounting indirectly, punctuated by very short bursts of essentially sheer terror. And that is unfortunately what you're likely to see here. And I describe this as instability bouncing between the escalation track of military escalation and then the allowing Iran to rise to become the fourth center of world power. And I don't really think you're going to be able to end that unless we, again, I do think that there's an important thought here that I want to get across today. Which is that I do think there's something that we should focus on in the negotiations. And if it's okay, I'd like to, because I just posted a big piece on this on Substack, I'd like to bring this up. So I think that it's not really going to be possible to end this escalation trap altogether. I think that's what everybody wants, and I think that that's probably not right. However, I do think that there's something that the negotiations should be focusing on more, and they're not, which is literally the price of oil. So right now, we're seeing negotiations about a whole host of these zero-sum issues here, whether Iran's going to have nuclear material or not, whether it's completely opening Hormuz or not. What matters to the public, what matters to that crowd at Busboys and Poets, though, are not all of these details, which, of course, the experts like us will talk about here. But what really matters is the price of gas, what they're really paying. And I think that it would really behoove the Trump administration to cut to the chase about whether Iran is really willing to commit to returning the price of oil down to the pre-war level. So you haven't heard that language yet. And I think it's important because I can well imagine we get a lot of sort of these MOUs and so forth, and then we discover that as months go by, the price of oil is still $90 or higher. And it's because Iran has lots of tools at its disposal here, including with its with the Houthis, with proxies, to find ways to keep that price and that risk premium high, even as some ships are passing. And so I think unless we focus like a laser on the issue that really matters right now to the world's economy, which is literally the price of oil here, I think that we're going to be sadly surprised when we find out that whatever deal might come is not actually that much of a deal, you see, because otherwise Iran will just simply continue to, deal with all these details when the bottom line for most Americans is what's really happening to that price of oil. And I think that this should be the front and center issue as the negotiations go forward, which is call Iran out. Is Iran really willing to have the price of oil come back to the pre-war levels of, say, the mid-60s for Brent? And if not, why not? And that could actually be helpful over time, because then you really could have a conversation here with China, with Russia, with the Europeans. Now you have something you're actually talking about that's concrete. And if we don't have that concrete issue, I think we're just going to be bouncing back and forth. There's too many big balls in the air all at the same time. And this is just a prescription for a dead negotiations.
And we
Why? Why should Iran put it back to the pre-conflict prices? How about give Iran their money back, like the 20 billion or so that was in South Korea, that's now in the UAE? How about give them their money back, like? How about lift the sanctions? Yes, I understand. I'm reliant on diesel for me pickup. But there's a bigger picture than what the price of petrol and diesel is. I know that's what's going to hit Americans and people here in the UK the most. The cost of living's already got everyone stretched. But why? It's like going back to the nuke as well. Why don't Russia or China or Pakistan just give Iran some nukes? And this all comes to an end, like. I know that sounds a bit crazy, like, but who have the Shia attacked in this so-called 47 years that they've been at war with the West? Apart from funding Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, who, by the way, are resistance fighters, who have Iran attacked? Please tell us, like. And why should they put up with it?
We have some breaking news here where Iran State TV is putting out what they're calling basically an unofficial framework that has been agreed to by both sides that they're continuing to hash out. The details are the U.S. military would withdraw from the vicinity of Iran. U.S. Navy lifts its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran commits to restore the number of commercial transit ships through the strait to pre-war levels within 1 month, though it doesn't say anything about whether or not they'll be charging or tolling or what. The Iranian state media says military vessels are not included in this draft agreement. The managing of the ship traffic would be handled in cooperation with Oman. Oman just today announced a lot of new kind of trade and financial agreements with Iran, kind of preparing for a post-U.S. world. So that fits with the idea that they would maybe continue charging tolls. And then number 6, if a final deal is reached within 60 days, that would involve the nuclear dust and the other stuff. The agreement would be approved in the form of a binding UN Security Council resolution. So that's what the Iran State TV is putting.
That's right. So that was in line with, on Saturday, I posted, that was coming out from Iran's media, actually. So I posted this on X, and that's roughly the same. And that's what I meant, that those have always been Iran's terms.
This is similar to what Jeremy Scahill reported Friday night. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if someone, say the Gulf of Mexico, I know Trump likes to call it the Gulf of America, or the Gulf of Trump. So if someone from China or Russia was sailing vessels through there and making a killing, billions, would Trump be okay with that and just say it's international? Oh yeah, it's international waters, they can do what they want. Look at the channel between England and France. Look what's happened over the years with the fishermen contesting. You can only fish here, you can only fish there. Oman and Iran, the Straits of Hormuz, that's on their borders. That is their waterway. You get so many nautical miles. It's their waterway. What's it got to do with America anyway? Honestly.
This is exactly what I mean by those are Iran's terms. And what you see is President Trump is having to move to Iran's terms, which is effectively surrendering on Iran's terms, you see. And that includes the tolls. So this would be Iran becoming the 4th center of world power. What I'm adding to that is that what's missing here is we're negotiating those 6 points is the actual issue that I'm putting my finger on, which is the price of oil here, because you could end up with a situation where even with that deal, the price of oil does not remains near $90 a barrel, 20-30% higher than it was before the war. Iran would have lots of reason to want that extra money. Russia would have reason to want that extra money. Even
give them their money back. release their frozen funds and lift the sanctions?
For a year, China might be willing to go along with that. So over the next year or two, this is the critical issue here. So what I would say to President Trump is that you could agree to all of those 6 points, but then I would point out that the real thing that needs to be focused on is getting the price of oil back to close to the pre-war levels, and as a commitment by Iran. So if for some unknown reason, price of oil fluctuates, Houthis, for instance, decide to attack a pipeline, there will be an agreement that Iran will already understand it has to make adjustments, allow Saudi Arabia, the UAE, to ship even more ships through the Persian Gulf than before the war, where the key goal is not exact number of ships, the key goal is the price of oil.
Right.
Yeah. Why don't America lower the price? They produce a load of oil. Trump's bragging about how many million barrels are leaving America. Why don't America lower the price? Honestly, like you say, I just don't get it anymore. I don't get it.
All right, Professor Pape, always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, we're going to try to see if there's a way to wiggle out of this trap. I told you I'd be working on it, and there is a way to try to wiggle out of some of this.
Need a lot of oil.
Let's hope we can do it.
Yeah, all right, take it easy.
Let us know what you think. Like you say, just release that money. Lift the sanctions. Let everyone get on and live in peace. Iran have got the majority of the oil. Let them get it out and sell it. Stop restricting them with sanctions. Trump's been bragging for close to 2 months now about how America are self-sufficient for oil. They've got all the oil they need. Why can't America just look after themselves, lower the price for their people? You know why, don't you? It's just sheer greed, sheer greed. They want it all. They're not happy with 99.9%. They want 100%. But anyway, that's it.